on, Don?
Oh, wait, hold on.
It's calling Neville down for you, dog. I know you can't get back here.
Oh, I appreciate you.
Hi, Dwayne. Okay, so we are live, and I'm going to give everybody a chance to log on since everyone's joining through the hosting site. Okay, so I can see everyone's video. Awesome. All right, so I just want to thank everybody for taking the time to tune into today's table talk session, and it is being Black in the military. So my name is Dominique Goodman, and I am the founder of Correctional Views. My organization is stemmed in the research and promotion of education with the criminal justice system and prison treatment in America. However, due to the recent events in the Black community, I've become expansive and teamed up with Advanced Carolina just to bring more insight towards the community, both Black and white, on what's going on in America, increasing the understanding between communities, just in order to promote different solutions other than fuss and fight on social media with each other. Today, our topic, like I said, is being in the military. And this was the time that we are not going to have members of the white community speaking, because this is a table where we are providing just a time for the individuals serving in the military that are Black to speak with one another, compare stories, express their viewpoints on certain things, and, address anyone that they feel that they need to address at this time. Just in the promotion of solutions stepping forward and how things are run in the military. I have not ever served in the military. I am simply a military brat. So I have a very different perspective on my views of the military. But before we do get started on the conversation, I do want everyone to have the opportunity to meet the panelists that will be speaking tonight. So they're gonna go ahead and introduce themselves.
Okay, I'm Wayne Goodman. I'm a 21-year retiree, Air Force, contracting field. I currently work for the VA now, still serving vets, working with vets. 21 years. I don't know anything else you want to ask. That's it. Air Force, aim high.
There you go.
You know, Colin.
Yes, sir.
I'm going to follow up with my Air Force comrade. I'm Val Applewhite. I'm originally from New York by way of Connecticut. I'm a 20-year Air Force veteran. I served in the telecommunications field and retired honorably. And now I retired as an enlisted E7. And now I have a son who is a first lieutenant in the Air Force. So pass that Air Force baton down to my son. I was proud to serve, travel the world, do everything in my education, but there were challenges, and I'm glad to be here tonight to talk about it. That's right. I think we got a Marine in the house somewhere. Is there a Marine in the house? Marine. Anybody here a Marine?
Of course, at least one.
All right, let me hear from you.
At least one. So my name is Carl Myrick. I'm currently active duty right now, serving in the Washington, D.C. area. I have about 8 years, coming up on 9 years of experience within the military. Serving as a captain in different spaces, as a XO, platoon commander, all the various things, matriculating through the military. That's it.
Colin, I guess it's on you.
Good evening, everyone. I am Colin Richards. I am a captain in the U.S. Army. Been serving for the past 11 years now, going on 12. Enlisted and commissioned, 9 years commission service just this past May. I'm an air and missile defense officer, one of the 4 combat arms, the best artillery out there, Carlin. You know how we do. Carlin's still air defense artillery, so I like to give him give him a
I'll
hard
stay
time.
muted out of respect.
I am looking forward to tonight's conversation. I'm glad that all these wonderful individuals have decided to join in. Glad that a coach and a mentor of mine, Colonel Wagner, I'm glad you came on, Colonel Retired Wagner. Probably a wealth of knowledge, like I told you before, Dom, to contribute to this conversation like no other. So, yeah. That's it.
All right. Well, I'm Tobias Carpenter, U.S. Army veteran. Served 11 years, got a reserve part. My last duty station was Fort Stewart, so 3rd ID. Been deployed a few times. I enjoyed my service. I wish I would have stayed in longer, but it was time to go. Family first. That's it. Keep it simple.
There you go.
Hey, I guess I'll go next. My name is Natasha. I retired from the Air Force after 20 years. Across those 20 years, I've served in every command. I've done things that were both within my AFSC or my Air Force job, and I did a lot of special duty assignments joint with the Army, Marines, and Navy. And across 9 PCSs, inconveniencing and leaving my family behind to go on deployments for almost a year. I've come to shed myself of the patriotism that I held on to for 20 years, particularly because I'm a Black woman. And once I retired, I started unpacking the experience of being Black in the Air Force, and some of what I hold on to is not so much just a moral injury around, the global warfare that I participated in, but how just my body showed or I should say the response to me, how traumatic and violent that it was on active duty. So I'm excited to be here and share some of the reasons why I had to shed my patriotism in order to liberate my mind post-retirement. Peace.
Okay, and I believe Dwayne is left.
Sounds good. I'm just trying to figure out how to play with all these buttons here. Can you hear me?
Yes,
My
we
name
can
is
hear you.
Dwayne Wagner. I served on active duty for 30 years from 1978 to 2008. And like you, I too am a military brat. My daddy served in the Army for 22 years, retiring as an E7. I currently teach at the Command and General Staff College at Fort Leavenworth, and I appreciate the opportunity to share this evening with you.
Okay, and I just want to thank everyone for taking the time to join this panel tonight and speak out on this topic. Like I told you all, I am a military brat. My mother, my father, and even my brother went to the military, so I was considered the rebellious one by going to college. I don't have the mental space to have command over me. I've never have, never will. So I have a lot of respect for you all to take that on. And I just want to let everybody know.
We know.
I have to say,
You ain't listened to me since we was 15 years old, so.
Don't show off in front of company. So I just want to let everybody know that's joining in on the webinar that we do have the questions, live questions and response available. If you do have any questions directly to a specific panelist or to the group as whole, you have that opportunity to do so. But prior to getting into any questions from anyone watching, I just have a question, and anyone is free to step forward and answer this first. Why exactly, or what exactly made you join the military? And after joining it, what is the feeling of being Black in the military?
This is Val. I joined in 1979. As I mentioned, I was enlisted, and nobody in my family, I was in Connecticut, nobody in my family had been in the military. I didn't know anybody in the military, but, as many of us grew up in less than optimal circumstances, there was I did well in high school, but there was no money for college. No one was even trying to tell me how to go to college, this thing. So, I used to catch the bus coming from work. It was across the street from a recruiting station. And I just knew that what I was doing, going back and forth, catching the bus, I was working at a bank, wasn't what I wanted to do, and I needed an out, and I wanted to go to college. And I didn't want to be a burden on my family because there was no money. So the Air Force was the way out. So I was 18 years old. After the community had a cake, they all drove to the airport and saw me off, and I was gone for 20 years. So the main driver for me was education and travel. And I have to say, 20 years, I don't regret it. I enjoyed all of it. I did, the traveling and the experiences. Yep.
Yeah, so I originally am from the South Side of Chicago, specifically born and raised in the Inglewood community. You can Google that to know probably what that was like, or just use your imagination. And so in high school, I come from an under-resourced school system that some schools had, and then the others that didn't got JROTC. So my on-ramp to this was being indoctrinated that, hey, you've got these years of JROTC, if you take it into the military, you'll have some rank once you graduate basic training. So that was attractive to me without much thought. And like Val, coming from a working poor class family, paying for college just wasn't, although I made the grades, that just wasn't something that my family could afford. So I chose to enlist. I took the first oath while I was still a senior in high school. And 6 months after I graduated, I was off to Lackland Air Force Base, the gateway to the Air Force. And, why did I do it? I was told that in order to get away from the violence of the South Side of Chicago was to go and, quote, serve my country. And so that's, so I talk about the economics. I'm talking about, escaping violence because of the predicament in which, my city, was in '96 when this was, the decision was upon me. I don't know that I had a very well-informed idea because I thought JROTC was the military. And I'll go ahead and pause there because I think there'll be a moment where we can dig more into that. Thanks.
Okay. Anybody
My
else?
My story is similar. I was in JRTC in high school, wanted to go to college, didn't know how I would be able to go to college because my family was poor. And I had the opportunity to get a ROTC scholarship. So I joined the Army, or was commissioned into the Army, because I needed a job. And I had planned on staying for 5 years. And I served for 30 years. And I think I served for 30 years because once I entered the Army, I knew that the Army needed Black officers to serve and to lead too. Over.
Okay, so I have a question more so directed to Carlin and Colin. I'm more familiar with you all, and you don't, share the similar storyline of leaving straight from high school to college. I mean, high school to the military. We all attended college together. What was your motivating factor to go to the military based off of that?
Colin's more senior, so I'm gonna let him go first.
Ooh.
Wow, that was unnecessary. So my experience in the military. So for me, the military was an opportunity. I had my first son when I was young. Wasn't prepared to dad all the way, so I was like, man, I need something a little better. I was probably 3/4 of the way done at A&T, but I needed some money. Supporting a kid and trying to finish paying for school, was a lot. So I was like, you know what, I'm gonna just join the reserve. So I enlisted. I was a medic for about 2.5 years. And I remember I was begging my commander to let me deploy. There was 2009. So, they were looking for people left and right, especially medics. So I was like, I want to deploy. And I remember my commander was like, nope, you going back to college? And I was just like, what? I want to deploy. And then I remember walking across the campus one day, ROTC, the PMS at the time, he just happened to catch me and was just like, hey, you interested in ROTC? And I was just like, oh, no, not really. I want to deploy. I don't want to do ROTC. You know, I want to be a drill sergeant. I had all those dreams and aspirations. You know, I want to be a drill sergeant. I want to, you know, go pursue all the hula. And he was like, how about if I give you an airborne school if you sign up and you take a PT test? I was like, okay, that perked my ear. And there it was. He got me in the airborne school within 5 months of my first semester in the program. So I think the difference for me as a coming out of straight out of high school is I think I had a little bit different life experience as opposed to my peers. Some that come out of the service academy, some that have just different walks into the military, some that enlisted straight out of high school and then eventually maybe commissioned later on down the line. They just have a different life experience than you do. As I think college, you know, it's just, I think it is a little bit more carefree in some aspects. The service academy from my peers was very different for them. Those that went to West Point or the Virginia Military Institute, some of the other military institutes across the country. So I think just coming through the college experience still and then going into the military, I've seen a lot of things that some of my peers, I could tell they just had not experienced before. So I was like, well, I've kind of been there and done that. So there was a level of maturity. Plus I was already a dad. So I had the understanding of responsibility and the care for another person. So I think it brought a different level of maturity and responsibility. Even though I was very immature as a lieutenant, Colonel Wagner could probably attest to some of the debates I've gotten into. That's like my uncle right now at this point, because man, the tough conversations that have now brought me very close to him and learning him, I think has taught me a lot. It's grown me up in the military. But that's kind of my experience in a broad brushstroke. But as we get deeper to the questions, I don't want to prolong Carlin's stage time. Shot over.
Stage time. So my story is definitely different. Similarities to Colin that I just found out right now. We probably talked about before, but I also enlisted as a combat medic, which is kind of crazy. I just realized that. Yeah, we both like, I didn't even know that. So I was almost done with school, and Dom knows me very well as Colin, that I had some challenges in terms of focus. I was pretty much 4 years into North Carolina A&T, and my focus was just shot to the point where I was like, I just need to go home. And the only reason that I ended up in the military is because I knew I just wanted to do something. And all I knew was the Army National Guard, because I had a friend that enlisted into it back in 2008. And I was like, cool, I'm gonna go ahead and do it. Knowing that my parents were gonna be super upset with me, I just went ahead and enlisted anyway, and I left 2 weeks later, like that, and that's just what it was. The purpose of it was really not for money purposes, as it is with some other people, financial. It was really just getting myself grounded to something different. And to this day, it's probably the best decision that I made. Once I went through the whole training pipeline, came back and transferred over to Bowie State University, where I actually conferred my degree from. And once I got into the military space, I realized that I wanted to do more and I wanted to go active duty. And I pretty much got the best advice from my battalion commander at the time. And he told me, like, hey, if you're going to switch over to active duty, don't stick with the Army because that's what you know. Go talk to every single branch. And that's exactly what I did. Partially, I went into the Marines office first, and I was sold off break. I didn't even get a chance to go see the other ones. So years later, I mean, here I am into the officer program, and I'm 100% enjoying my time in the Marines. And I definitely have a different connection, and I definitely attest to what Colin said. It's a different experience, and of course, I went in when I was 22 years old. I had pretty much a long list of life experience outside of high school that definitely contributes to my leadership style now. Connecting with enlisted soldiers, or not enlisted soldiers, enlisted Marines. I was gonna go off of you, but enlisted Marines, sailors, and then any other joint force. So, as I said, that's pretty much my story.
Okay, and so it's like just funny listening, well, not funny really, just listening to everyone's description of why they joined, different reasons. It seems like everyone had like, for the most part, a positive, impact from, the military. There, no one's, except one regretting joining the military. Everyone has been able to see like the contributions to their life it's placed on them. So how are you necessarily responding to the feedback that you're getting? Well, that I've even heard, and I'm not in the military, that, you're in the military and right now you're Black and you're a traitor. Like, why would you serve for a country that doesn't stand for us right now? Like, how are you guys responding to that?
Mm.
Oh yeah, you want to go?
Y'all that are in
Yeah.
here.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess I'll jump in since we're the for the current state. It's very volatile waters to walk in right now in terms of how you voice your opinion, what you have to say, is particularly as a enlisted, not so much. I think they have a little bit more leeway with what they can and can't say, in terms of depending on where they fall into the rank structure. I don't know why it's just more socially accepted. But for the officer side, it's cutthroat, and you can literally railroad your career by speaking out on certain things. I haven't personally been attacked for why I'm serving, despite all that's going on. I've seen it. Everybody's seen the real viral video of the National Guardsman that was getting screamed at by the young brother during when they were out there in Minnesota, or pretty sure it was Minnesota. And, I was enraged, but at the same token, I was like, let me put my commander hat on. What would I have done as a commander? And that was my soldier right there. I think for me personally, I probably would have stepped in and just tried to talk to the young brother because he was just hurting right then. And the only way he knew how to project was project at that soldier. He wasn't even mad at that guy that's doing his job. I think he was just mad at the idea that this America doesn't love us. Why are you not standing on our side? And that's what I saw. We saw it with Keke Palmer, the actress. She was all out with it. And I think right now they just don't understand. You don't understand. Unless you serve, you really don't understand. And unless you're truly committed to it, you really just don't understand. I can particularly say for the officer side, people just don't understand how you have to conduct yourself. I know I even told the line a lot. And when I do, my mentors jump in my DMs in a heartbeat. I told the line, I'm very.
I've seen the post, and
I
you know what?
Line.
I have to say this. I'm retired E7.
Mm-hmm.
Understand the politics from an enlisted ranks and from the officer corps, if you will. And I've seen that you toe that line.
Absolutely.
And I applaud you. Because I know the politics of it. And I definitely.
It's rough.
Hmm?
It's rough. It's rough. I look to a lot of, so if you guys, you need to add Colonel Wagner as a friend on Facebook. If he has enough space to accept you. He's got so many friends now, I don't know if he's got enough. Because his posts are very, they invoke a lot of good discussion from whites and blacks. And I'm talking about super far right, some falling in the middle in that moderate area, and then you got far left, blacks and whites, so on both spectrums. And what I've learned from his posts is how I provoke conversations and how I put information out there and be careful with my verbiage, even respond. Sometimes my emotion gets to me, and I think that's my character. I'm a very dynamic person when it comes to that, and I have to pull back. But I think with engaging now, like towing the line when I say that, it's I kind of take cues from what senior leaders are saying in some aspects. I'm like, what are they saying? So I'm still aligning with the Army's priorities, because people like to call this a political issue. I don't think this is political. This is a human issue. This is about people. Sergeant Major Grinston, the Sergeant Major of the Army, I think he gave the green light for people to separate. This isn't political. This is people. And there's something that all my Sergeant Majors have echoed about the Army since I can remember. My first one in Bolick, Sergeant Major Carr, he told me, he was like, we about people in this Army. He said, when all the equipment and everything else goes away, we are about people. And so this is, when you look at America, it's about the people. It's about the equality and the equity and for the people that are in this country, because we are what makes this country get great. Not all the bills, not all the legislation, it's the people. It's the beauty of being able to come here onto a land that's supposed to have opportunity and equity for all, that unfortunately doesn't seem to have the equity that we think it does, or some people perceive it to be. And so I'll turn it over to Carlin. I've been talking long enough. Go ahead, Carlin. Or anybody else.
I just want to say something, you know, because I don't know how the communication is, you know, within the military. But I know that me, in my capacity, I speak to a lot of people that are not of color now, prior military within the VA, you know, I've run into a lot of prior military. So where in the military, it was structured and you didn't necessarily see the racism. Now you see it all. But the only difference that me, myself, is I can engage in communication. I can communicate with them, understand their view, even though I don't necessarily agree, but we're able to communicate. I'm curious as to how that communication flows within the military now. Anybody jump in that's in the military. Carlin?
Yeah, I would, yes, sir. I would say and Dominique knows this about me. I'm a very like critical, meticulous thinker in terms of anything that I do or say. And I think you have to understand, especially being on the active duty military, and Colin's 100% right. There is definitely a difference between enlisted and officers in terms of how they speak about the issue. And it is what it is, and it's the way that it is in the military right now. But I think there has to be some type of a understanding, and I think this is where some of us talking about Black officers kind of get twirled up around the finger with. You have to meet people where they're at, and you can't get wrapped around the axle if somebody doesn't want to meet you where you're at. And what I say with that is, you're not going to change every person's mind about what's going on today. And you have to realize and accept, hey, that person's not ready for this conversation. One day he'll be ready or she'll be ready for that conversation and we'll talk, but I'm not going to get upset and emotional and everything if this person doesn't want to meet me where I'm at. Now, if it's affecting one of my Marines, it's a completely different conversation. Completely different conversation. Now, we're just talking as like two officers in a group and they don't want to meet me halfway. Cool, don't meet me halfway. But there are just as many people who are trying to meet you where you're at as those who are not. And I think when you have, unfortunately, the way it is, especially in the Marine Corps, is like nobody, regardless of who you are, nobody wants to talk about tough issues, especially civil issues, if you're not a person of that's reputable. And I mean that by like, you're not performing at your job. Number one is like, is that a good Marine officer, period? If he is, then or if she is, what was that?
Your credibility goes up if you're a good Marine.
Exactly. It does. And it shouldn't be that way, especially when we're talking about racial issues. I'm just saying this is the way it is. You have to be a performer in order for your voice to be heard. And I think I do applaud our commandant for trying to take a step forward in terms of removing the Confederate flags from Marine installations. And I think that was pretty big, and I didn't even see that coming from the jump. But it's kind of different. And people give me that question, specifically to Dominique's question, is how do you feel when people say like you're a traitor and this, that, and third, and all this other stuff? I had to tell people like I'm solely here and I'm performing a job to the Constitution of the United States. America is working through these issues. But if you see the impact I am able to have on those Marines who enter when they're 17, 18 years old, looking for some type of guidance and mentor, that's everything. That means everything to me right there. And that is how I deal with when people say, oh, well, you're doing this, that, and the third. It's like, man, I'm helping a young man or woman navigate through life by me being an example of things that I don't do, the things that I did when I was this age. And the fact that I can connect with them, I can guide them through life a little bit. So like Colin said, I don't want to get off on a tangent because I will. So I'm just going to cut off right there.
So I have,
Bro, you
a question for Natasha now. So because you guys are pulling in light of, you know, what you're grabbing onto to, you know, for what you say, this is why I'm here and this is why I'm okay with staying. And Natasha, I know you said previously, like I don't believe you sit well with being in the military and you had to step away from your previous patriotism. I can't say the right word. Explain yourself on that part.
Yeah. You know, so while on active duty, I was an airman's airman. I did everything that the Air Force asked me to do, and I did it with exceptionalism because somewhere along the line, I learned that there was a square that I had to fill just to be promoted. And some people call this black tax. So, you know, for every time that I worked for a promotion in the Air Force, we tested for promotion up through the rank of Master Sergeant, which was my highest rank held. And, you know, when I think about all of those things that I did, and when I had to sit back and unpack, like, why was I having tension around things? The intersection was race. I was at headquarters, Air Force Special Operations Command, which is considered a feather in a cap type of assignment. There were, it's a very white male field. Any type of special operations, the Air Force is similar to the Navy SEALs and the Army SOC units, and also MARSOC. And so when, you know, being there and being a minority, so I was in an office at the command staff with a 3-star general and a bunch of generals under him, where Trayvon Martin was killed 2 hours from where I was stationed. And to hear my peers talk about how they would have shot him too. And to hear my peers talk about eventually later when Michael Brown was killed. And so I was sharing in our office like, man, I can't believe I'm seeing the MRAP, which are the vehicles, the militarized vehicles that you saw the Ferguson Police Department driving down the street with. I was in a program that helped buy those things that were bought for war, particularly in Iraq and Afghanistan. So to see them infiltrate cities and police departments that overwhelmingly over-police and criminalize Black folks or folks that just look like my father and my husband at the time, was something that I realized that my peers who say they're defending this nation had a great disdain for people that look like me. And in fact, once I started speaking about my beliefs on social justice and race and racial tensions in America, that I learned that my peers were in an underground type units of extremism, right? We see stories here today talking about folks that are on active duty being arrested for being a part of extremist groups. I was in an office with people like that, and they got promoted well because they didn't toe the line. They crossed it. They came in their authentic, extreme, you know, selves. And so while what I'm saying to you and sharing with you is that my experience with racism in the military is no different than what people are experiencing in my community, right? And to be a part of that militarized presence. And I feel like there are things about being in the military that that we're seeing dominate communities through the police. And so to me, the connection was very close because again, I had participated in a program and I have a joint decoration for something that kind of brings me shame because to the gentleman's point about, you know, feeling like a sellout, not that I accept that, but at the time I wasn't aware of what I was doing on active duty. So the reason why I said I had to come off the patriotism, when I was on duty, I was an airman's airman and I did exactly what I was supposed to do and I exceeded the standard. When I, it's kind of like when you know better, you do better. I then realized the connection between the military and my community. And now that I'm back home on the south side of Chicago, I'm seeing all of that equipment that is excessed on that we, overspent and overcommitted because we know how we waste funds, right? Or we take a wag at things. I'm seeing them play out in an unsafe way in my community. And so why I say I unpacked my patriotism, I had to, because it smacked me in the face when I came back home. By no means am I saying that I am ashamed of it. I have a box and actually a room full of all of that stuff. I'm just saying for me personally, I would not do it again. I hope that answers your question. I know I took the way around the block with that, but I just want
to. Could I interject something here? Back in the day, I grew up in, with Gil Scott Heron, and the crew talking about the military industrial complex, and the military industrial complex is still alive and well. The military industrial complex is well-funded. It's well-funded only because you have to have those military arms and things to support Colin and Carlin. Understand that. But they spend it in clips of appropriations. Now, what you're seeing is those appropriations are now being reallocated. So what is on the street now are residuals from what Colin and Carlin can't use anymore. Now they use, depending upon your view, against and or, for the purpose of keeping us in line. And that's really the real deal, because we're going to spend the amount of money that we're going to spend in military appropriations because that funds the economy to some degree. I say that because if you take during the Gulf War, the military industrial complex actually funded my salary and the people that worked for me, 12 of them, for 2 years. Iraq funded me and my 10 people for 2 years. That military industrial complex is what it is. And it's going to be what it's going to be. Now, should it actually roll over into our local communities? No, it shouldn't. I agree with that. I'm only speaking this to say, if you understand what that is in the bigger picture, that's the only reason that the local police authorities and everything else can actually get that type of equipment, because there's a surplus. It's just like anything else. If you drop $1 million bomb, you got to rebuild $1 million bomb. And that's just reality.
I get that. I get that. I get big picture. Served at the tactical level and also the strategic level. And I understand the 1033 program that gives that equipment to police, because I was stationed in Defense Logistics Agency.
Yeah, no, and that wasn't.
But can I just give one quick point? And it was kind of important, if I can, is that peace is also an option. I've seen the acceleration of global fronts from just a first voice, a first person experience. And so, when I think about the money that we spend, while this nation doesn't have the social supports that we need as people, which I think plays out in our national violence, it's the underbelly of all of these social ills that we have, is that people don't have enough. And so if our nation is so focused on machinery and, like you said, the bombs, then where's the conscience of the nation that says, we should be reimagining some of those funds at home. Look at COVID-19. It is unacceptable that we could not afford to test people. My zip code was the highest rate in Illinois. We did not get testing in 60628 until 4 weeks after Black folks were shooting through the roof with not just infections, but deaths. That's unacceptable when I see missions happening abroad. So I look at this, again, I'm looking at both. I know what it's like to be in boots and to be in those meetings where you're getting the good stuff and it's like, cool, we got our stuff, we need to go and carry out the mission. I'm also seeing the hard expense of that in a real way as a nation. And it's shocking that we don't try something else.
Well,
No,
what I wanted to, what I wanted to, if I could interject, is for the people that are listening and never served in the military, we seem to think that racism doesn't exist in the military, but racism is alive and well in the military because the military is nothing more than a microcosm of society at large. So they bring those predispositions, those beliefs, and we're in a uniform now. So people seem to think just because we put on a blue uniform or green uniform or whatever, that those beliefs are going away. So, when I enlisted in the military in '79, we fought a different battle, a racism battle within the military, not like what we see, on our streets now. But there are challenges as a Black woman. My God, I had the racism piece, I had the sexual harassment, I had all of those things that you had to deal with within the military that subsequently has brought about change. So Natasha, maybe some things that I had to go through, like men walking by and you bent over a desk and guys think they can just hump you, so I had to go through that, right? And I too was that airman's airman, like Val was always getting promoted and everything, but that was a challenge. So racism still exists. It's alive and well in the military. And I just don't want people that have not served to think that we live in some sort of panacea, some kumbaya moment, but we fight this thing every day.
Well, I have a question actually from someone that's in, and they said, my command, which consists of all white males, from senior enlisted advisor to the CO, XO department heads, are collectively struggling as how to best address racism in this movement that is playing out around us with the whole unit. So far we've had silence, and that's deafening. I am also white, but have engaged with my division, engaged with minority members of the union to get their perspective and approached every member of the command to urge them to do anything to address the problem that we face in society as a service and as a unit. The response from the command to me has been, what do we do? What do we say? So I am here to learn and to pose that question. If you were a member at my unit, what would you want them to do? What would you want them to say?
I'm gonna take this one. I talked to you about this, Colonel Wagner, and I've sent you what I sent to sitting battalion commanders and future battalion commanders. Like lieutenant colonels are reaching down to ask advice from people that they think have the answers. I don't have all the answers, but for that question, regardless if you're white, I don't think it removes you from being able to have the conversation. I think the issue that comes from that is, though, you got to make sure you have the right people in the room to understand and empathize with the conversation. And so if you're dealing with an all-white command, they're not going to know how to address it. And for fear of retribution, they're not going to say anything until either there's someone in their command that they deem credible, as Carlin would say, or someone that they think has the aptitude to talk about the content intelligently and be able to facilitate discussion that's going to help open up the floodgates for people to feel comfortable to talk about those things. So my advice to you, to that watcher, that participant, is to I know you. I hope you have at least one Black friend in the command or in the unit that you can at least approach and get some perspective from, and maybe they can point you to someone that, hey man, I got a buddy that's in the military that can probably talk you through this a little bit better and give you the advice. Matter of fact, you can send them to my way, and I will give them some TTPs. And for those that are civilians watching, TTPs are tactics, techniques, procedures, but give them some ways and means to be able to navigate that discussion. It is not an easy discussion. I sat with a guard unit on their virtual drill and talked with their command about it recently, and it was because they didn't know how to talk about it. All white command, white lieutenant, they didn't know what to say. So I helped them facilitate discussion, and that commander still texted me today talking about how the soldiers just felt so much better just because they were at least willing to listen and hold the discussion. And now they're thinking of programming and things to move the way forward. So you're gonna have to have somebody that in the discussion that has been through it. Like you can't just be a bunch of white guys in the room talking about, oh yeah, I get it, man, racism is bad. You can understand from that aspect and see that something is bad. I can look at something and see it's bad, but I don't think you really feel it until you have somebody maybe share some experiences with you. And that's why I say, that's why it goes back to the people thing. You got to really understand the people within your unit, within your command. So that would be my best advice. If anybody wants to piggyback on that, Carlin, you already unmuted. So
real quick, but I do
Colonel Wagner.
Yeah. I'll real quick. I just want, and I do want to hear from Colonel Wagner though. I definitely think he probably has a vast amount of experience in this. But one of my other mentors definitely helped me frame and shape points when you're going to end up having a conversation. I want to put it on record here. So he told me these are the 5 points of diversity when you want to end up talking about a racial issue amongst a whole bunch of other people. He said, number one, there will be tension. And I think everybody needs to recognize there will be tension talking about racial, or pretty much any type of race related issue amongst a whole bunch of people. Understand it, recognize it early, mention it, so people are just aware of what's going on when you actually have that conversation. The second one is be aware of your assumptions, which is a big key for a lot of people when they start talking about these issues, is being aware of your assumptions, not only for our Caucasian counterparts, but as well as us, assuming that we know exactly what their background is, and assuming they're going to act a certain way when we talk about things. Another part to that second point is to be cautious of using words Black or minority, and how do you want that to be perceived? Do you consider yourself Black? Do you consider yourself African American? Do you consider yourself a minority? And be cautious of what those words mean when you say it. And I think you need to back it up in terms of if you're going to say it that way. Understand and give context to what you feel like you are. Some people like saying African American. That's fine. I like saying I'm Black because to me, that's me. I feel like I'm Black, and I don't feel like there's anything wrong with doing that. The third point is you won't change anybody's mind within this discussion. And I think you got to realize that in a 45-minute discussion, you're not going to solve the world's problems about race. And if it was, maybe you should have been world leader at some point. I don't know, but understand that's not going to happen. The fourth one is provide your perspective. Understand that you do not represent the entire community. And that, I think that is very important, that you do not represent the entire community. So when you're saying certain things, understand if you're the one Black person in an entire room of 15 other officers, they're going to expect and assume, again, don't assume, but they're going to assume that you're speaking for everybody else. So understand what your words mean. And if you have a different opinion and view on something, understand they're going to walk out that room with like, well, Captain Myrick said, no, don't do that. I'm not representing the whole community. I'm representing myself and my perspective of what I think about these issues. And then the last one is just prepare yourself for unfamiliar perspective. I think you'll probably be surprised when you start talking with other people, again, like their experiences and what they think. And you might be taken aback a little bit, but just understand that that's just a good way to facilitate a conversation. That's it.
I'm just, one of the things that why I really wanted to get promoted, and, you know, was to get to a point where I can make a difference for those, because I remember what it was like to be an airman without voice and not being able to speak up as much, speaking truth to power. And so one of the things that I, you know, really took pride in was being a mentor for people that look like me, for everyone, but particularly for people that look like me, because not enough people stepped up when they should have. And one of the things that I realized was, you know, young folks, you know, need that guidance. They need that free game from folks to share, you know, widely share information. And so when I think about the question about being white in a unit, I think it's important to like start from somewhere. So I have a friend who's a senior master sergeant on active duty today, and her wing commander asked her to come and lead a discussion, and they were prepared to listen. And when she got there, she said, you know, this is really you all's work, sir. And she opened up with things like reading and short clips of, you know, we call it current events, you know, using it to educate in a way that's not so confrontational. Whatever works in your unit, I think that you all should do it. We had wingman days where we kind of stood down, and it was an opportunity to kind of take off the stripes and stars and bars and have real frank conversation. We have to continue to do that all the time in terms of race, because until all of us feel like we're whole in a unit, none of us should feel like we're whole in a unit, right? And so I'm looking at, just to, you know, really to wrap up, there are some findings out here where there was a recent testimony to the Senate Arms Committee to Congress around the disparity on race in the military, particularly in the Air Force. Black airmen are 71% more likely to face court-martial. In the Marines, 32% more to face court-martial and to be found guilty than their white counterparts. In the Navy, it's 41%, and in the Army, it's 61%. This conversation is starting and happening, and I think that those people who are in decision-making roles, we didn't get to these percentages by accident. There are folks who have failed these folks. And when I say failed them, I'm saying over-policing some while slapping others on the wrist, because what these comparisons talk about is that given the same articles of UCMJ, Black folks are those much, you know, are over-policed and over-criminalized. Someone has got to fill in the gap. So if you're a lieutenant and a captain or senior master sergeant, this is the time to find out what your command is ready for, and at least take the baby steps, because we can't pretend like it doesn't happen. Listen, there's an AFI or an Army regulation that says that discrimination is unlawful, but it happens. So we can't rely on what's in black and white, because they found a way to operate in the gray. We have got to fill in the gap when it comes to that. I think because it's time, we should use this momentum of Black liberation in our nation to open up these conversations. And again, it might take, you know, someone to get a slacking, but when I say a slacking, I mean, it might be painful for you to go to a commander, but find someone that might have a better relationship to the boss, and at least start and see if they're willing to have it, because we can't pretend that this isn't a huge issue. There are many people who commit, who take their lives because of the toxic command climates that they're going through. The same best friend that I'm talking about, the wing commander called her because her Black male airman, a 3-striper, committed suicide the weekend before Memorial Day, 2020. And so a lot of what's coming out around that is how he was erased in his unit from a lot of things that he deserved. We're talking about real things. Racism is not something that doesn't impact people, you know, in their entire beings, not just on duty. I've taken up a lot of space, but I'm bringing these things up because I just want to, you know, make sure that I know the active duty folks can't say it as much, so I'll do it, you know, but there's a space for us to, like, you know, find our way to make sure that we can fully liberate folks, you know, to just feel whole on active duty as well.
Okay, so like my next question is going to be towards Mr. Wagner, because people are really looking forward to you speaking right now. How realistic is it to have these conversations right now?
Not very realistic. And as I sit here and listen to all these stories and these situations, I'm impressed that everyone seems to think that this is a new conversation. This is an ongoing conversation that our ancestors and our grandparents and our parents have been having for centuries and decades. So when my father, a sergeant, integrated an all-white regiment in Korea in 1950, the only black man in a company in 1950 with desegregation of the military, there was a conversation that was being had in the nation. And as we move forward, every generation has had this conversation. In terms of the specific question, in an all-white chain of command, where there may not be any black leadership, I'm going to push back a little bit at the notion that a black person has to lead it. I think a leader can facilitate the conversation, but what has to happen is that leader has to have the ability to listen to his or her soldiers, Marines, or airmen. So anyone can facilitate as long as they're willing to listen. So we ought to have the conversation. The question I'm asking everybody is, what's next? What's next? I was a military police officer for 30 years. So I'm very familiar with crime rates and how things happen. What is going to occur with policy and decisions so as we move forward, there is less bias? What's next?
So we were having a conversation Monday, and the conversation starts surrounding about policy. And the biggest pushback when you speak about policy in any department of life in America is we don't have a seat at the table. So when you're speaking of, getting this policy to be changed, how does that, how do you push that forward for it to happen?
Yeah, that's a good question. I spent 12 years in Washington, D.C. out of my 30-year career, working in different policy arenas. And earlier in our session, someone talked about, why are we here? Why did we stay? Well, one reason we should stay, as the young lady mentioned earlier, is to get to the point to where we are sitting at the table and we can push or initiate policies that help to improve or reduce bias and discrimination. How do you do that? It first starts with people staying in, getting promoted, and when they get into positions to have a voice and to speak up. How do you do it? Be willing to raise your hand, go to the boss, and make a recommendation regarding a change. But let's not fool ourselves. And several of you have talked to this already. If someone comes into the military and they're biased or racist, you're not going to change them immediately. There may be some who over time step back and learn how to get along with people who don't look like them. But every generation of a military service, we're going to deal with people who don't like us based on who we are. And all we can do is be aware of that and try to be proactive. We need to stay in the military. We need to get promoted. We need to wear the stripes or wear the bars or wear the stars and to stay active. Our ancestors died so we could be full-fledged American citizens. They died so we could do this. And part of being a citizen is serving in the military, but not serving in the military where you think you're being treated unfairly. And I know that's happening. Over.
I could add something to that, Mr. Wagner. Yes, staying in and wearing the bars and progressing into leadership, but we have to remember that the military ultimately has civilian leadership, right? So we always talk about our votes and whatever that it matters. And I was formerly an elected official, and I can tell you that a call to a congressman, can get things moved a whole lot quicker than trying to move policy through the Pentagon. I spent 6 years at the Pentagon as a civilian, and trying to get a paragraph through to be implemented at base level is going to take you 2 years versus a call to your congressman that says, hey, General, hey, Chief of Staff, we're going to make this happen tomorrow, and it is. So not just internally, we have to be able to provide pressure externally to the civilian leadership that ultimately writes the policy that we operate under.
Okay, so my another question, because as you all know, there's some people that, you know, don't feel comfortable speaking out at this point in the military. But there's like several issues that they're going through right now. So we have, you know, everything that's happened with, you know, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor. We get hit right next with George Floyd. And, you know, the whole thing with the combativeness between whites and blacks because of the riots and the protests or whatever. You know, there's people that are currently in the military serving that cannot speak on their opinion about how their culture is being treated. However, they are able to witness their white counterparts openly blast their opinions on Facebook, openly express their disgust with our aggressive thug nature of whatever they feel. And there's no ramifications on their part. But them being a Black individual in the military, they're not able to say anything. Like, so how does policy affect those items? Like, is that where you place it towards leadership? Is that like, how do you implement policy into action?
That's a good question. And the hardest part of policy is changing it into strategic direction and empowering people who are in leadership positions to take action. I'm going to disagree slightly and say that our Black service members do have a voice and can use their voice within social media or within conversation, as long as their voice is not disruptive to the Constitution. So they can speak up and speak out. It's just a matter of how they do that. The hardest part of all this is having leaders who are fair enough to watch and listen and to do the right thing. And as several of the speakers have already said, we have some leaders who are unable to do that because they in themselves have bias, or they don't know what they're looking for, or they're more concerned about their career. It's a balancing act, and it's tough. I agree.
Okay, and so like Tobias, like, was there, like, I know you said that you wish you would have stayed in a little bit longer, but during the time that you were in before you got out, like, was there anything that made you feel like you wanted to affect change in, like, you know, the dynamics between different cultures in the military?
It's okay. I'm glad. Sorry, I was here. I was here with y'all. When I was in, I was like the other one was saying, the reach to the youth. I missed the question earlier. Well, I missed answering earlier. I went in the military older. So most of my sergeants at the time when I was a private, we was at the same age. So we was able to conversate on different levels, on where when I'm in front of everybody else, yes, roger that, Sergeant, roger that, I'll be that way. But when we got outside, we was on our personal time, we was able to talk one-on-one about everything going on. And I was a mechanic. I was a tank mechanic, so I stayed in the motor pool. Majority of the time in most military motor pool, you got a lot of blacks that are mechanics in there. So we didn't have our motor sergeant. He was white, and he was with us trying to understand, listen to our music, rap and all going along. So I really didn't have too much. But the main thing is you reach those young ones that's coming in, that's want to be the gun ho, don't know everything going on. And as Colin was saying earlier, as being the officer, I wasn't an officer, I was enlisted. So yes, there is certain things you can say and can't say. Us being as enlisted, when I was lower rank, I didn't care what I said. But once I got that sergeant rank, I had to watch what I had to say then. Because you got to deal with the younger ones. The younger ones that don't know nothing at all. I am here. That's all they hear. I'm just here. Boop, here I go. Whatever it is, I'm going to do it. But the education-wise, it takes some time to toe that line, as you say. Toe that line, know what to say, when to say it. Is that a better answer for what are we looking for here? Or when to
Oh
say
yeah,
something and when not to, when and what to say. When is a better thing, better way to answer it. When to say something, when not to.
okay, so maybe you can explain this to me because I feel like I'm speaking for several people that have their opinions on, individuals that previously in the military, currently in the military. Do you feel that you're forsaking like a part of like your individuality by having to monitor what you're saying? Do you feel that you're trading a piece of yourself for like future success? Or do you feel that, this is just America and you just have to play the game?
No, honestly, I took it seriously. Excuse me, I'm one of the ones I got to stand up every now and then. I took it seriously when I was in. Everything that's going on, yes, that was my job. But I did raise my hand, stand at attention, put up that oath. So that's guaranteed, that's locked in. As being in the military, anybody that served, that's guaranteed. That's going to be locked in us for life. For life, whichever way you want it, whether you had your good days or bad days, whatever about military, but you still took that oath and you know that's your job regardless. Yes, there's some things that you agree on. I can say it now completely, I'm out, that there's some things that's going on I don't agree on. But that was my job. I had no choice. That's the first thing. That's the first mission, knowing your job being a soldier.
Anybody else
Yeah,
have anything to say on that?
I agree with Tobias. We took an oath. Colonel Wagner, we had these discussions on Facebook where people are like, if you ever come to that point, because I think we talked about the MPs,
Right.
that had to go to DC, and you posed that question to the group about, if it comes to a point where your duty feels compromised because of your moral compass, what do? You bring it to your command. You suggest maybe a different course of action or a different way to approach the problem. So you never come to the problem without a solution in the military. That's one. And I think that's in life. You should always come to life with your problems with solutions. You shouldn't just go around complaining. I think that's a waste of energy and time. But we talked about if we were the MP company commander that had to go to DC recently to help with the National Guard, and there became an ethical dilemma because they're a black commander and he didn't feel it was right to unleash his soldiers on the local populace in a domestic situation. You have to look at yourself internally and be like, what is my job? Am I going to execute my duty? All right, is it unethical? Is it immoral? Or is it illegal what we're doing? You have to ask yourselves that question. And if it comes to the point where you feel like what you're doing is illegal or immoral or unethical, then it might be time for you to separate from the service. Now, there is that fine line where you can approach the situation. And then if it came to that point where it really truly was illegal, if it was something like what the Marines had did back in the day, urinating on the bodies and things like that. No offense, Carlin. I'm saying y'all ain't got no common sense, but it's okay. No, but if it's what the Marines had did back in the day or something like that in wartime where it was considered a war crime, yeah, that's that moment right there. That's something illegal. It's unethical. It's like, all right, they're already dead. Why would you take it to the next step? And so that's when you got to look at it here. Is what we're doing illegal? Some people would say yes. Some people will say no. I think that is a individual choice, and you have to be willing to live with the consequence at the end of the day. But you did take this oath to protect and serve, to defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. What you deem as domestic enemy may not be what the government deems as domestic enemy. They may see Antifa as a domestic enemy, but you don't see them as a domestic enemy. But at the end of the day, if Colonel such and such says, have your unit down here at this time, no later then, and you will execute this mission, by God, you better do it. Or be like, sir, I can't do it. I resign my commission. Here you go. I resign my seat. Lieutenant such and such is going to take over, and he's going to execute the mission. But it's a very hard internal fight. I will say that is probably the one thing I am glad I have not been had to deal with yet. My peers that I know, some of those company commanders that are in that MP company, and they are torn internally. They are torn. But they had somebody that looked like them as top cover to be like, it's going to be okay. We got it. he's not going to allow them to go into the fire and feel like they're compromising themselves. And as we saw, nothing bad ultimately happened in the DC situation. I know Tennessee had a different situation with the guard. We saw what happened with Keke Palmer and those guys and the guardsmen out there who eventually took a knee with her and talked to her and tried to at least empathize and understand. But that commander was on that ground to make that decision. And he was right there. There was a captain there present with his, it looked like acting first sergeant or platoon sergeant that was right there with him on the street corner. And so it's an individual decision, but you got to remember, like Tobias said, man, we all sign an oath. And if it comes to this point, as much as some of us may want to rise up for what we see going on in society, and rightfully so, because it's our people and it does affect us. The moment we take that uniform off, it does affect us. I can be in DC one day in uniform doing something, and the next day I could be out there wearing my Black Lives Matter t-shirt or whatever it is I'm supporting, and it's two totally. You light-skinned, Carlin, you don't count. But no, we could be out there doing that, and we get viewed a totally different way. I could be an SOB one day, and then the next day I could be the greatest American hero the next with my uniform on. And that's why this conversation has to be had, like you said, Dom, because, you know, man, there's so many experiences. This conversation going all night because Colonel Wagner, God, so many.
I'm saying that, but go ahead, Carlin. You had something to say?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the bottom line question is, can I be blue and black? Can I be law enforcement in black? Can I be green and black? Can I be an Army officer in black? We've been here before, and the answer is yes. And you can do both without violating your personal belief or your ethics or your integrity, as long as you are honest with your boss and your soldiers. And in terms of the example Colin gave, these young officers struggle with this in other spaces and other venues when it comes to doing what's right. Sometimes they're asked to do something that isn't above board, and they have to make a decision. As a military police company commander, I had to deploy my company to a civil disturbance in 1983. We've been here before, and I think we can be blue or black, blue and black, green or black, green and black, because we're citizens. We're the same citizens that we support. We are citizens first.
Go ahead, Carlin. Oh, okay.
If I
Natasha?
Colin like summed it up almost exactly what I was about to say. So yeah.
I wanted to call out my sister Natasha. I mean, maybe it's this Air Force thing that's vibing, but you said something that was important, that we wanted to be in leadership roles so we can influence other young Black people that were coming behind us. So sometimes civilians have the idea that military people just take orders and we don't think outside the box. But see, like, we get in our own little thing. We're like, look, y'all, this is what we're going to do. And we strategize and we get things done, but it's just not in this big public, obvious way. But we learn, I see some head shaking. We learn how to do some things on the low, where leadership don't even know what we're doing. And if there's young, Black airmen, I'm like, look, come here, I need to talk to you. You're not gonna survive this thing if you don't play this game right. So this is what we're gonna do. When we off duty, we're gonna handle this a different way. So, I've had civilian people say, well, y'all just take orders. We do what we gotta do to get the job done. But if y'all think for 1 second we ain't hooking up and figuring this thing out, y'all wrong.
Oh, you're absolutely correct, because guess what? It becomes our responsibility to those that are coming behind us to show them the game. Because at the end of the day, hold on, you could play any game as long as you know the rules. Now here go the rules. And when I tell you the rules, now you need to play accordingly. And not compromise your own personal judgment or beliefs, but this is the game. Now you can hold on to your own personal beliefs and do what you need to do, as long as you know the cards that are in that other person's hand. You know the cards that are being played. You just got to play the game, because it's only 52 cards in the deck. So
Absolutely.
once you expose your hand, you know how to play it.
Absolutely, I agree. Something she said, thought slipped my mind, but I want to hold on to it while we got it. I laugh sometimes with my civilian friends be like, y'all yes man and y'all, what's a better word? Y'all cooning. I'd be like, don't you got a boss that you work for? Don't you do what your boss tell you to do? It's the same exact thing. Ours is just a little bit more rigid and structured, but at the end of the day, everybody work for somebody.
Exactly.
And even if you're an entrepreneur, you might be a slave to your business. So you working for somebody, you working for them dollars because you got to make sure your customers have it. You all work to somebody to a certain degree. Some of us are at that entrepreneurial, point that, you don't have to punch the clock anymore, or you're not at that grind because you have people that work for you and you just collecting checks, but everybody works for somebody. And that's why I laugh when sometimes people say, I'm like, come on, man, I'm doing what I'm paid to do, what I signed up to do, what I believe in is the right thing to do, and how I'm going to build my children, my legacy.
Okay, so
Who's in Colin's body right now?
I just want to ask this question real quick. We're running out. So someone said, so not even the brother and sisterhood of being in the military can overshadow racism. I feel sexism is more of an issue here. Am I wrong?
I'm definitely gonna let them talk because they need to, but I just want to make a statement really quick that 100% I recognize, like, even as a Black male, like, you have your challenges, but as a Black female in the military, I cannot hold a light to the challenges they have to do. And I just want to tell to the two women up here that I respect y'all to the utmost, and I'm gonna let them talk. That's it.
I'm gonna second that. Because, Val could probably speak to it because we were probably in that same era, if you will, and there are definitely challenges, and they're alike, totally apart, but alike.
Well, I would want to hear Val and Natasha speak because I can speak to my mother. My mother retired out of the military, and I don't know the full reasons. I just know that it was issues and racism, and she had enough. And like literally it was one day she's like, I'm out. And she regretted doing it so much. She regretted letting people get under her skin later to make her come out of the military. But she had enough. So like, what are you really experiencing, Val and Natasha?
Yeah, I resonate with your mother's experience. Similar. I was like, I could have gone, years past 20, but it wasn't an option because of that unit that I told you. I was, predominantly white male, excessively type A. It was exhausting to exist in that space. And so, once I was pension eligible, I punched the clock. And I'm glad I did for a lot of things so that I could be more present for my daughter, who I realized that I was missing way too much time. So as a military brat, I'm sure you know what that feels like. And so I am, really excited about just reconnecting with my family because I had missed a lot over 20 years. And so when I think about, sexism being the biggest issue, I don't know a woman. I definitely don't know a Black woman that, hasn't experienced sexual assault, particularly sexual rape and other violence. My best friend would call me at 2 a.m. when she was in the Horn of Africa with suicidal thoughts because she saw the rapes or heard the rapes that were happening in Iraq to fellow sisters. And I know that this is triggering to hear, but I want to give it some light because, I can't tell you what it was like to hear her just talk about feeling betrayed that her brothers would do something like that. And by brothers, I mean the guys who should be comrades. And it wasn't just active duty, it was the contractors who were over there who, you know, a lot of women that I know live with a lot of scars from that. And even in the Army, when I was deployed at Camp Arif John, I remember hearing about young soldiers who were having sex with the sergeant major for promotion, or to go up to the, I think it was called the honor, it was a board that the young NCOs would go to. And so those types of things are new. They're not, or excuse me, they're not new, but they're still going on today. And so yeah, when I think about, you know, sexism, every woman that I know most usually carries her unit on her back just because she's like the woman of the unit, and it's exhausting. It comes at a high, you know, and I say like stress. I started to see people lose their mental health because of the things that they had experienced around just being a woman in the military and making decisions. And then once they started coming back from deployment, how combat stress played itself out in women. I've seen women lose their desire in a lot of ways that broke and fractured their marriages. And so a lot of this stuff, you know, we don't talk about as women because it's shameful or it's painful to hear. But I appreciate the question because, yeah, you just probably need to hear this stuff coming out, that this is some of the stuff that you see senators bring into Congress to help eradicate the threat for women to come forward and tell their stories. And I'll just wrap up here and say that for most women who did speak out, you know, she either got reprimanded, taunted in a unit, put on kitchen duty, and for some people, depending on your job, that's humiliation. And so all of the reprisal that folks will get for just speaking out to want to even get medical treatment needs to stop. So yes, sexism is a huge issue, but I'll tell you that there are Black women in the military who are raped and don't get the value that white women who go through those experiences. So we have to talk about Black women being unsafe in all of these spaces, particularly in the military as well.
Okay, I'd like to piggyback on some of that, only because I could relate to Dominique's question, knowing her mom in a more intimate way. Us as Blacks, male and female, right?
I don't think he caught that, y'all.
You just caught that up. All right, Val. Wait, so at any rate, all of us, and Blacks more specifically, as you climb through the ranks, your later days in the ranks are the most challenging because you're in those positions of authority. Us in positions of authority are a threat to a lot of people. So I like to say I can only imagine President Obama's position and what he caught from what I caught as a E7 in a position of authority when I have to tell somebody, do this or do that, and they look at me in such a way, feeling sort of kind of way. That's what you get when you get to those positions of authority. And at that time, when you're about to retire, it only gets harder when you're at that 20-year point or at that 19-year point when they're about to give you the carrot. And, oh, you need to do this because that carrot's right in front of you. No, I don't need to do that. It becomes a gut check for you. And they will check your gut at that point because they know certain people will bend under that type of pressure, right? In certain situations, you just gotta say, I don't have to deal with this no more because at 20, I start working for 50% anyway. So I'm gonna take my 50% and roll. And that's where, Dom's mom was pretty much at, but it's the same situation. No matter who you are, no matter how you react to certain situations, that's exactly how it is, because you're at that level of authority. And Colin and Carlin, y'all can probably speak to this because I'm sure y'all feel it. When you can make a decision on somebody that totally opposes just the view of you, it's hard.
Wait, if I could say something, for me, it was almost the reverse of that. So as I got to my 20 years, things got easier for me. But it was when I was a young airman, when I didn't have power, is when it was difficult for me. So, and I wanted to follow up with what, and I don't have to, Natasha, I think you summarized it very well, what it's like, the experiences of Black women in general, but particularly Black women. As I mentioned in our introduction, I left home because there was nothing there. So I was hoping this Air Force thing would give me opportunity. And I get to my first duty station, and I'm 18 years old. I'm a wild thing. I'm trying to learn this discipline thing, and you got guys rubbing on me and doing all this kind of stuff. And one day I told this one guy I was gonna whoop his, and I was prepared to his ass in the work session, in the work space. I got sent home. I got sent home and told to report back tomorrow morning in my dress blues for an intent to impose Article 15 punishment, because my only recourse, and I was prepared to fight him, like for real, for putting his hands on me, and everybody watched it. So the next day I had to come in and report into my commander. Yeah, Article 15. It was like the craziest thing, and I laugh now, but I went home to my dorm and I cried because I couldn't go back home. Like, I'm stuck in this place where men think that they could do whatever, and I was a wild child now, because I'll fight you, and I will fight. But that's what I had to do to survive the sexual assault in the military, because I didn't know any other way. And when I talk to soldiers and airmen, I go TDY with Women's Veterans Group, ain't nothing's changed. They just got new policy, but men have too much authority and power in the military, and that's how it plays out. I came into service in 1979. I retired in 1999, and this is 2020, and I hear the same stories.
Well, you said that you're hearing the same story, and I'm going to ask this final question because we got to wrap this up. Like, I can tell this conversation can go on forever. There's so many different lanes to go down and things to address. But in the table talks that I've been doing, it's always systematic racism in schools, systematic racism in prison, systematic racism in the hospital. You can really put systematic racism towards any, different, department in life. And so I realize it's systematic racism that's been, that's what created America. And we've discussed several things and issues that you all have dealt with or whatever. However, that's the root issue, is that systematic racism. What is actually are these conversations we just have to address the issue and make it sound good that we care about it? Or is there actually something that can be done to kind of create impact and change within particularly the military at this point?
Systematic racism in the military, that's a very loaded discussion, but to kind of jab it at its root, it was written in doctrine, and it was written into doctrine, way back in the 1920s, 1940s. There was a paper I read recently by a student in the military, and he talks about it, and there's been multiple papers written across all the branches about how systematic racism started. It started at the general officer levels, where white racist males believed us to be as inferior incapable, incompetent, and only good to do what we seem to see ourselves in as a Black community now, where you see a majority of African Americans in the military and service, logistics, cooks. That's where you're gonna find a majority of Black officers in the Army. You probably see them in the Air Force. This is officers and NCOs. You'll see them in those service-related jobs. As you see us that in the society, we are a direct reflection of society, right? So when you see this in the military, this is no by happenstance. This is by design. Now it is finally being recognized by military senior leaders. And I think Colonel Wagner and you guys can probably attest, they probably noticed it before back in the 70s, but we were at such a point of civil unrest as a country back then with, coming off of horrible wars like Vietnam and Korea and everything else. They weren't focused on giving Black people equality, despite everything that was happening in the civil rights movement, all the bills that were passing. There was still so much racism going on. And as Will Smith said it best, racism, didn't go away. It's just getting, I think he said something to that effect, that racism right. Is getting videoed now. That's all it is. It's social media, it's mass media, it's at our fingertips. So Dom, to your question, yeah, systematic racism, it was written into military doctrine at one point. They viewed us as that. That's why you don't have the Black generals that are, other than the Colin Powells of the world, that rose to that level of achievement in their military careers. There's some that have come close, but they've all been rotted off the range one way or another. There's some even now that are right there at the cusp. But the fact that we're still having the first in the military, the first, quote unquote, the first Black female to graduate Ranger School, the first Black Air Force 4-star, that should tell you that systematic racism is still alive and well in the military. It's just disguised itself in different ways and different policies. As you can see with the Air Force recently, how they've relaxed the hair standards. Now the Army followed suit shortly afterward. Now the females can have locks as long as it doesn't mess with the wear and appearance of the uniform. I believe the Marines supposed to follow suit eventually too, if they haven't already. So you can see there are systems in place that are being broken down more and more as we call it out, and as our services are becoming more and more liberal. If you look at the Air Force, they lead the way in liberalism when it comes to the military, for one. And this is not just, you would think like, really? But no, they do. I noticed it when I deployed. All my deployments have been around air bases. So I've seen it. Just from y'all discipline and standards, I'm saying no shade. They ain't, I swear, airmen up to Command Master Chief, they ain't got no standards and discipline. Because they just be like, hey, hey, Bill. I'll be like, how about hey, sir? But you guys lead the way. And I just noticed, even with the recent killing of George Floyd, and when everybody wanted to release their statements, Air Force was first in the suit. Y'all senior NCO was the first one to jump out there. And like I said, on the enlisted side, he could have got away with that. Then you see, okay, now the GO, the white GO follows. Oh, my battle buddy got me, so I'm going to piggyback with him and support him. Then Marines, Army, and everyone else started following suit. But it just goes back to having those conversations, putting ourselves in position, like you said earlier, Colonel Wagner, playing the long game. And that's something I've had to learn, is playing the long game, shutting up in color, and understanding I have to attain to a certain height. I'm in a combat arms branch that I could potentially, the likelihood in my particular combat arms area is slim, but I could potentially arise to that level of being competitive for a Joint Chief of Staff position or something like that. But I have to be willing to wait, play it out, stay in, not get fed up at 20 years, get the good evaluations, which unfortunately I can only perform at the end of the day. Whoever's evaluating me is going to determine that, but you got to put yourself in position. And then there's the 50% performance, and there's something as a recent mentor told me that's about to take brigade command, is 50% reputation. Your reputation will precede you in most of your assignments. In the Army, I realize how quick it is. Who knows who and who knows you. So that's kind of how systematic racism works. You got to get your board of directors has to look like you and not look like you at the same time, because that's the only way we're going to get our feet in the door. It has to be those guys that don't look like us, unfortunately.
And so I'll ask you a question, Colin. I'll let you go ahead and talk. So would your advice be to those Black members that are currently enlisted, which I've heard a lot of lately, especially from Colin and Carlin, to become like they need to go ahead and get in these leadership positions? Does that evoke change instead of, just staying at the minimum and not getting their degree and not becoming an officer or a captain or a lieutenant? Like, is that?
I don't want to, yeah, but I don't want to get it confused that you can't make change on the enlisted side. Like, you do not 100% need to be an officer in order to invoke change, which is one thing, and I'm sure Colin will agree and attest to, like, all of my experience in terms of what I know and I have gotten from my senior enlisted advisors, and they guide me 100% the way. On the flip side, there is and of course, there's two sides to it. And as Colin said, systematic racism that happens within it is just it's as simple as like 1, 2, 3. And as Colin said, the Army and the Marine Corps are very much so combat oriented. And in order for you to reach or have more opportunities to reach to those colonel, general levels, you need to be in those domains of combat armed services. However, African Americans typically see the military as a chance to get in, gain a skill, get out. And they're not wrong for that, but we have to at some point change the narrative in terms of like looking at infantry and field artillery and ADA as looking as, well, I don't want to be on the front line. And it's like, as some can tell you who've been in service support, when you got to go on the front line, you're going to go on the front line regardless of what, what job you got. Like, they're gonna put you there at some point. So you gotta put yourself into a position in order to compete for those levels. And I think that starts very, very early within those ROTC programs, within those mentors that you have very early, to show a different side to those combat arms MOSs that lets you get into the service, compete for jobs, compete for command, and get to those general levels, as General Colin Powell did as an infantry officer that went to Ranger School and did all those sexy stuff in order to compete and get to that high domain in order to institute change. But that's just a microcosm. I just wanted like double down on that. And then also just addressing racism is not as blunt in your face as it is maybe about 20 years ago, but there's a lot of microaggressions that you might see within the military that you need to address spot on. And you cannot let it linger, because people will then draw up the energy in order to make it about racism. But like, oh, you go hanging out, down on the block. Hold on, pause. What block are you talking about? Like, because it is very, like, it's very systemic and it's very relating to the African American community when you say that. And you gotta be able to have those blunt conversations. And if they don't understand, again, like I said, meeting people where they're at, I think it's different between meeting people where they're at and understand where your line is going to be drawn with certain things they're going to say around you. So that's my 2 cents. Bye.
Okay. And so, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Okay, and so just to wrap it up, I'm gonna lean on you, Mr. Wagner. Like we were saying, okay, we have a better understanding of systematic racism, the structure of it in the military, how it's gone on, how it's still here. What are the next steps? Like, how do we address this?
Yeah, the next step, as we've talked about so far, it's each person trying to influence their space, their people, their boss, and trying to do what they can do to make their unit or their service better by speaking up, by speaking out, and by taking action. And I'm going to say once again, regardless of your rank or your position, you have the ability to do that. I'm going to give you a specific example. Last week, I spent 90 minutes with a 2-star general, one-on-one. 90 minutes. Why did I get 90 minutes with this 2-star? It's because I sent an email to him requesting that he take a look at X, Y, and Z so we could improve race and diversity within professional military education. So what does that mean, professional military education? That means that every major who comes through a command and staff college and every colonel who comes through a senior service college has a discussion among his and her peers regarding race and gender. We're not doing that right now. But I can tell you, I'm very comfortable that next year, every major and every colonel is going to have that conversation. And then they're going to go back to the operational force better armed. But the ones who are biased or the ones who are racist, we have to hold them accountable in that formation. Colin's absolutely correct. I want Colin to spend more time listening right now so he's a colonel one day and he has more power and influence. But I don't want Colin to sell himself short or to feel like he's a yes man. It's a balancing act. I'm 64 years old. I served in uniform for 30 years. I've been a federal civilian for 11 years. For 41 years, I've hung around to try to make it better for the people behind me. And I can say things that other people can't say, and I'm taking advantage of that. But I can do that because I decided to stick around to try to make a difference.
Okay. That's really powerful that you would actually commit yourself to that. In closing of this conversation, I want to go to everybody, every single person on this call. Please, I'm going to say 2 minutes and I'm going to time you. 2 minutes. What you're taking away from this call and like what you personally are doing and or something that you feel that you've wanted to address to the community and you didn't have an opportunity to have an appropriate like way of expressing that. I'll start with you, Carlin. You're the first face I see.
Oh, put me on the spot. My very easily is to. I just want to say, like, in terms of reaching out to people, and I've seen it many times, the lack of guidance that African Americans, Black people within the military get. There has to be some type of mentorship, advocacy within the ranks, and that's the only way. And we have a very tough diversity problem within the officer ranks, which is more so what I'm focused on right now within the Marine Corps. And that's starting from an early level of ROTC programs. And that's having the discussions about, you know, why, like, there's really no reason. It's one thing I always think about. There's no reason why North Carolina A&T State University, as the #1 institution to graduate Black engineers, does not have a naval ROTC program. It makes no sense. But you want to include diversity within the sea services. Okay, well, that doesn't make any sense to me. So bringing up those conversations, and honestly, it's probably things that people did not even realize that are now being brought to the forefront. It's the same thing as like reaching out to the rest of the kids that's at the Naval Academy right now, encouraging them to go to Marine Option and go into these different type of MOSs and achieving the heights and just reaching out. And I think Colin said it the best in terms of Colonel Wagner, in terms of you have to have some type of level of endurance in order to sustain and make it to that level in order to empower change.
Okay, Val.
I was just thinking, Carlin mentioned something about mentoring. I mentioned that my son is a first lieutenant in the Air Force, so I spent a lot of time being a retired enlisted person, mentoring him from an enlisted perspective, but also connecting him with retired generals and colonels and stuff that can help him along the way. So I'm thinking that maybe all active duty military personnel there should be a relationship with folks that are, you know, retired and been through the game before. I think that's powerful. So I work for Advanced Carolina. I'm an organizer and I do this work on the ground. And in my organizing, I bring my military strategy and my focus to my work to advocate for change politically, socially, economically, because if anything that the military has taught me is strategy and being focused. So I use that time, my 20 years in the streets to get things done. The last thing I want to say is that sometimes I feel a little awkward because I hear I experience the pain of my people. Having been in the military, I still want to say I love this country. It's 20 years of my life I've spent, protecting, defending the rights that we all experience. And it's the environment now is such that you almost can't say that, but I do. I still love this country, no matter where I've traveled across the world. I'm gonna tell you what, I'm always ready to get back to the U.S. with all of the struggles that we have, and I'm prepared to try to correct those struggles. So thank you, Dominique, for hosting this and having this military conversation. And to all of my brothers and sisters, all y'all that are not Air Force, I still love you, but my Air Force people, got that. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Wayne Goodman.
Yes. Well, I think that it all comes from mentorship, reaching back, and whenever you can reach back and grab, teach and or tutelage, provide some guidance from all your experiences to people that are coming up. That is the best and only thing that you can do. I myself, in my positions, whenever I can reach back and get mine, I'm gonna get mine. So I implore anybody and everybody, if you reach back and get yours, pull them up by the bootstraps. And that's the only thing that I can say. That's the only way that, we as a people could do anything. That's my take.
Okay, Colin Richards. 2 minutes, Colin.
Yes, I know I'm long-winded. Keep you in church till 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock on a Sunday. But Dom, first off, thank you for thinking of me and to be a part of this conversation. It's a conversation that's needed to be had, and also it's a conversation that needs to continue offline. It starts with something that Colonel Wagner has brought up before. Val, you brought it up, that mentorship piece. We got to start pulling them up early. Black officers, Black NCOs, we got to reach into these ROTC programs. We got to, such and such, and Auntie and them son just joined the Army. Give me his number. I'm gonna connect him with someone, and it starts there. It really does. That's how we teach each other the game. Ain't nothing changed about how we teach the game. When you walk in a room and you looking around the room, you see that one Black person, your eyes kind of light up. Okay, there's one. I see you. And then you'll gravitate to each other at some point in that event or that evening. And that's what's got to happen until the change comes. And even after the change comes, we still got to continue to do that until we see balance return. Because what's going to happen, I think, right now is everything's going to be very over. Everything's going to be extra and over the top. And so you're going to see the scales tip so far. And I don't think that's what we want at the end of the day. We just want the scales to be even. So as people arise, we're all rising at the same level. And I say that to a lot of people because there's a lot of minds out there that think Black people should get everything and, white people shouldn't get nothing. I'm like, nah, that's not how it needs to work. Despite what some may think with an eye for an eye, it's not how it needs to work. We need to tip the scales so that way we have the same opportunities and the same equity that everyone else can achieve. So to all the participants and such that watched and people that were attending tonight, please feel free to reach out and so we can continue this discussion. And let's be level-headed about it going forward. Let's work together and let's be smart and have a direction and be organized about what we're going to do to cause change within the military and outside. That's all I got, Tom.
Miss Natasha.
You have to tell me that warning too. Like, I'm gonna cut you off in 2 minutes. So I'm gonna be brief, but I want to take us back just a little bit when I think about like the next steps. I want for there to be a space for us to have conversation around the times in which this nation has unleashed this military on people practicing their First Amendment rights. I want us to acknowledge that because we just, I heard some of the conversation earlier about, making a conscious, decision to like follow orders. And I think about the times that the National Guard has been presented with our people, be it after Hurricane Katrina, be it LA 92, be it Kent State, or be it the Chicago 1968 Democratic Convention, when it was really around a Black uprising, then that we saw the Guard. And there's been only 2 times that aerial, bombs have been let off in America. And it's on our people in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and the Moore family in Philadelphia, I think about 30 years ago. And so this is, we're not talking about foreign and domestic in terms of an enemy. We're talking about Black people. And we're talking about the times in which we've raised up for our own liberation. And then I'll close with this. In Louisville, around the, demand for, what would you call that? Justice for Breonna Taylor, who was unjustly murdered in her home. A local business owner was shot and killed, and we found out a week later after attempted cover-up that the National Guard shot this brother, who's a pillar in the community and used to feed the cops for free while grilling at his business and his establishment. These things are historical. And so when I think about how we move forward, I think there should be some atonement in these conversations that we're having on a granular scale, right? And like, why has the military been placed? Why are those missions even put there in the first place? And I know that's not for active duty folks or veterans, but I'm thinking about, as a country, we have to start atoning this presence upon Black people, just for Black freedom. Y'all, I don't think we're asking for too much when we say take your knee off our neck, or when we say that we deserve to feel, that same freedom that everyone else that's non-Black feel. And so I know that that's my 2 minutes. I'm gonna go ahead and end, but
I just want to let you know that you have people in the chat saying, why can't y'all shout out the Navy? That's all I'm gonna say.
I mean, that's real too, but I think, when I just, think about the conscious of like how we grow forward, there's a lot of books that are out there. White Fragility is one of the ones that I know a command down in Oklahoma is reading. That includes their White 2-star, on down to the second lieutenant. And I think there's a lot of things that we can do in this moment to educate ourselves, not just from a military perspective, but from the greater community. Thank you for hosting this, Dominique. This was awesome.
No, I just thank you all for attending. I think it speaks highly of you guys to put yourself in a vulnerable state to talk about your current conditions, your beliefs, your viewpoints, and your plans for stepping forward. Like I said, I am just a military brat. I do know the benefits of the military. I experienced them. However, I think it's vital just to express what actually goes behind closed doors, and let everyone on the outside looking in that doesn't know the truth just a little glimpse inside. So thank you all for attending, and I really appreciate that. Just keep these conversations going within your circles.
Thank you.
Hi.
Aim high.
I said hi.